So today I'm going to be walking through how to make these flared trousers with pockets. I've made the pattern available on Etsy, which is my poppy pattern, and I have tried to make everything as beginner friendly as possible. I think there's a few parts of the video where I forget to say what kind of stitch to use, but basically always use either an overlocker or a zigzag stitch. If you don't have an overlocker, use a zigzag stitch. Other than that, I think that's everything, so let's get on with the tutorial. So for this project, you will need a fabric with a 4-way stretch. This is 95% cotton, 5% elastane, and I got it from Jelly Fabrics. You will also need pins, some fabric scissors or something to cut out your pattern pieces, some fabric pens or something to draw out your pattern pieces, some flat braided elastic, this is about 1 inch wide, this is going to be for your waistband, and some fusible interfacing for your hems. The pattern that I'm using for this project is my poppy pattern, and there are 4 different pieces to this pattern. So the first one is the front of my trousers, which folds out to look like this. For this one, I'm going to need to cut 2 of them out of my fabric, and if you have a fabric with a right and wrong side, which I do, you want to make sure that you cut one in this orientation and then flip the pattern and draw another one of your pieces in this orientation. This is going to make sure that you have one for each side of your trousers. And then your second piece is very, very similar, but this is the back of the trousers. So that folds out in exactly the same way. And for this one, it's the same thing, that you need 2 of these in total, one in this orientation, and then flip the pattern and draw another one in this orientation. And then I have pattern piece 3, which is the pockets, which will look like this. And you need 2 of these again, and you also need these to be cut with one in this orientation, and then flip the pattern and cut one in this orientation as well. If you're not using a fabric with a right and wrong side, you won't need to worry about this, but it is quite a good habit to get into, even if you're not using a fabric that you need to do this with. So just make sure you cut one like this and one like this. And then the final piece is pattern piece 4, which is the waistband. So you only need to cut one of these, but you need to cut it with this edge lined up to a fold, which means that when you cut out this piece, it will fold out into a much longer piece, a piece that is twice the length of this pattern piece. So I'm going to go ahead and draw out all of my pattern pieces and cut them out, and then I will be back to show you how everything looks once it's all cut out. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to show you how I'm going to alter the length, because these are definitely going to be too long on me. So I've taken a measurement from around my waist to just past my ankle, which was 37 inches, and then I'm just going to add an extra inch for all of the seam allowance and the hem. So that takes me to 38 inches, and this trouser piece measures at about 41. So I'm going to take those extra 3 inches out of this section here, rather than taking them off the bottom, which will change the shape of the flare. It will take a lot of the flare out. So I'm just going to cut it out of this middle section instead. So it doesn't overly matter where you take it out. So I'm just going to chop down here. So then I'm going to find where 3 inches is. I'm not going to cut anything off just in case I need this pattern for anything else. And then I'm just going to keep them, just zoom in, slightly off center so that I can see how far I need to pull this up. That is about right. If you are unsure, always make sure that you take less off than you think you'll need. And then just before I sellotape that, I'm going to measure again, and that is about 38 now. So I'm just going to sellotape that in place, and then you can just trim off these bits at the side to smooth it out. So that's going to be my new piece. I need to repeat that for the back piece as well. If you want to make them longer, you can do that in exactly the same way. You just want to cut down the middle, move your 2 pieces apart however much you need. So say you are adding 3 inches onto the length, move them apart that much, and then put a piece of paper underneath where your gap is, sellotape the two sides to this new paper and then just draw your lines in. Just fill in the gaps and then cut that out. So then you can add that 3 inches. This kind of section, it doesn't really matter what kind of shape you've got, as long as you're keeping the same kind of size around here. The shape doesn't overly matter, so you can just join it up in whatever way you find. So I've just finished getting my pattern pieces cut out. So I've got my 2 pocket pieces, and as you can see, they are facing in opposite directions, one for each side of the trousers. I have my piece for the waistband, which was cut on a fold here, so that when you fold it out, it is twice the length. So I just have one of those. And then I have 2 pieces for what I believe is the back of the trousers. You can tell because this curve here is longer for the back than it is for the front. And I have 2 pieces of these, and again, they're facing in opposite directions. And then finally, I also have my 2 pieces for the front of the trousers as well. And again, they're facing in opposite directions. So I'm going to start by putting together the front. So I'm just going to take these 2 pieces, and with right sides facing together, just place them one on top of the other. And then I'm just going to pin along this curved edge here. So now that I've pinned that in place, I'm just going to go and sew this with my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch. I'm also going to repeat exactly the same step for my back 2 pieces as well. So just laying them on top of each other and pinning this curved edge in place. So that's how that should look once it's sewn in place. And then if you open it out, you'll see that you're starting to get the general trouser shape. So now I'm going to put these to one side and I'm going to start working on my pockets. So with my pockets, I'm just going to turn it over to the wrong side. I'm going to start to hem around these edges. It will be a little bit tricky because they are curved edges. But if you take your time, you should be okay. So I'm just going to start to fold these over, and I'm going to use my interfacing to do this. So I have my interfacing here. I'm actually going to probably cut it down the middle so it's not as wide. Just cutting that straight down the middle, so I've got some smaller pieces, thinner pieces. So then I'm just going to take this interfacing and an iron and to place this, just zoom in a little bit actually, place this up to the edge of the piece and then fold the edge over like that, and then press it in place. So I'm going to continue doing that along this edge here and then around this edge on the other side. So I'm going to be leaving this straight edge untouched and I'm going to be leaving this straight edge untouched. So I'm just going to do around this section here, which is where the opening of the pocket is going to be, and then just around this longer curve here, which is where it's going to attach to the trousers. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with this pocket and the other pocket. So I've just finished pressing my 2 pockets. I'm actually going to make this edge quite a bit less curved on the pattern just because that was a bit too tricky to get anywhere near smooth. As you can see, I haven't managed it. So now I'm just going to go and sew along this edge on both of them with a zigzag stitch. So just sew straight on top of there just to secure that stitch. You don't need to do it around this edge because this is going to attach to the actual trousers. So that's when I'm going to sew that. But for now, because this is going to be the opening of the pocket, this isn't going to attach to the trousers. So I'm just going to sew straight over the top of this with a zigzag stitch. So I've just got my machine set to the medium size of my zigzag stitch. I'm going to take this edge here and just sew right over the top of it. I'm going to make sure I reverse to secure that. And again, just reversing at that end. So that will look something like that. And then I can move on to adding these to the trousers. So I've just got the front piece of my trousers here. I'm going to start to match up my pockets. So for this side, I'm going to match up this top edge with the top of the trousers and this straight edge at the side with the side of the trousers. I'm just going to pin along those 2 straight edges. I'm not going to sew them just yet. So those pins are just going to stay in there for a while, and then I'm just going to pin around this curved edge. I'll just zoom in to show you that a little better. So I've got the pins here and then the pins here. So I'm going to leave them there for a while, and then I've got the pins around here, and I'm going to go and sew this in place with my zigzag stitch again. Just literally sewing straight over the top of here. I'm also going to repeat that for my other pocket as well. So I've just finished sewing my pockets on, so I've just sewed around this curved edge here. I've still got the pins at the top and I've still got the pins at the side on both of the sides. So now I'm going to take my back piece, which I've sewn together the same way that I did for the front piece. I'm going to lay that on top of this one with right sides facing together. So now I'm going to go in and pin my two layers together. So I'm going to pin straight down the side on both sides and then up and round the center here. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that in place and then sew it in place, and then I'm going to lay this out on the floor so that you can see a little bit better where I've sewn. The only thing you need to make sure here is that when you're sewing down these edges that you get this pocket in place that you've pinned as well. So when you pin this together, you can sandwich that pocket in the center. You can sew straight down there so that you get the pocket in the stitch line. You want to do that on both sides as well. So I've just finished sewing my two pieces together. I used my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch. So I've just sewn straight down this edge, making sure that here you have your pocket sandwiched between your two layers, and you just sew straight over the top of that. And then I've come up and over the middle section. So this is the crotch section. So you're going to come around here and down the other side, and then straight up the other side, and again with your pocket sandwiched in here. So now I'm just going to turn my trousers to the right side out. Now is a really good time to try them on if you want to. This way, if you need to take any length off, you can, and if they are a little bit too big, you can take them in at this point quite easily. There's not really much you can do if they're a bit too small, but it's worth trying them on anyway. So now that they look like this, I've still got my pins up here at the top of the pocket. I'm just going to put these to one side while we make the waistband. So now I have my waistband piece and my elastic for the waistband. The length that you need for this will be in the instructions. So now I'm going to take both of these and fold them with the right sides facing together and just pin along this shorter end. I'm going to do the same with this piece of elastic. Pin along that end. Now I'm going to sew along both of those ends with my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch as well. So now that I've sewn both of those in place, I'm going to take this waistband and fold it in half lengthways so it looks something like this. And now I want to take this elastic piece and put it inside this fold. So it will look something like this. So you've got your folded piece of fabric and then your elastic sandwiched in the middle. So now I'm just going to take some pins and pin around that open edge. Just making sure you're not pinning the elastic to the fabric. So then once you have that pinned in place, I'm just going to go and sew straight around there with my overlocker. You can use a zigzag stitch as well. So that's how the band looks once it's sewn in place. And I'm going to grab my trousers piece, make sure this is the right way out, and I'm going to start to attach the waistband. So I'm just going to find some of the points of interest. So I have a pin just there on the seam, and then I'm going to put one at the same place on the other side. That shows you the halfway points. And then I'm going to fold it again with those two pins, one on top of the other, and then put a pin at either end because that's going to show us the quarter points. This doesn't have to be perfect as long as it's roughly in the right places. So now finding this top edge of the trousers, I'm going to take my waistband and then finding one of the needles that I left on the seam, I'm going to pin that to one of the side seams of the trousers. And then finding the pin on the other side, I'm going to pin that to the other side seam of the trousers. And then finding one of the other pins, pin that to the seam at the back. And then the final pin, I'm going to match that up to the seam at the front. So now I'm going to go in and fill in all of those gaps with some more pins, making sure that you include the top of the pocket when you pin everything in place here. Just sandwich that between the waistband and the trousers. So that's how that should look once you've finished adding all of your pins. Just making sure, like I said, that you get the top of your pocket in there as well. You can fold it up to check that you've got everything pinned correctly. Now I'm going to go and sew around that with my overlocker. As always, you can use a zigzag stitch as well. So I'm just going to sew straight around here. So that's how that will look once it's all sewn in place. And then you should be able to fold it out like this. And then the only thing left to do is to hem the bottom edge of the trousers. So I'm going to do this in exactly the same way as I did for the pockets. So I'm just going to take some interfacing down on this bottom edge, fold up the edge over the top of it and press that in place, and then go over the top of that with a zigzag stitch. So it's going to be exactly the same as how I did the pockets. So this is how the hem looks now that it's pressed in place with the interfacing. Now I'm just going to sew around that with a zigzag stitch. So I've just finished sewing around that bottom edge, and once that's done, the trousers are finished.